Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an exclusive story to the channel sent in by a dear friend who will go by the name of Standing Bear. And guys and girls, we have quite a few stories coming from himself over the next few weeks. This story being the first, and what a great way to kick it off with a terrifying Dogman or Skinwalker encounter. Please do of course let me know down below in the comments what you thought. As ever, please do like and share. Don't forget to hashtag Team Fear. And without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Old Barn. Let's get straight into that. I was born and raised in the mountains of western North Carolina, near the Cherokee Reservation. The property behind Mum and Dad's house belonged to my grandfather, and staying with him, like I did, gave me the chance to run all over the mountains. You could say I knew them like the back of my hand. I even had seen and killed just about every animal on those mountains, except for a deer or bear. I got chased by a bear once, while I was looking for our horse. That's another story for another time though. When my grandfather was alive, he had bought two special dogs called a werebeard. Don't ask me if this is how it is spelled because I do not know. These dogs were pretty awesome and very brave and protective. We stayed at my grandfather's old home as we worked his farm. We had started to notice how things were changing and happening. One being the dogs would go crazy around 1 or 2 in the morning. The male dog almost broke his neck trying to get loose off of his chain. Whatever he smelled or saw, he was wanting a piece of it. The female, she would bark and growl, but at certain times, she would go back into the house. The next morning, we let the dogs go and they both usually did their thing, ate and got water. This day, the male dog took off out on the road heading towards the old barn. We never thought anything of it as we had work to do, but that evening, he was nowhere to be seen. The female went inside our house and would not go outside, and my grandfather did not allow the dogs inside. But when I went to get her out, that lady tried to bite me. Granted, she stayed inside that night, but early in the morning was when things started to get weird. At about the same time, she was scratching at our bedroom door and going crazy, like she was crying. When I opened the door, she ran in and went under the bed. We went back to bed, and in a short time, we smelled a smell like, well, wet dog. I said, "Oh girl, you gotta go because you stink." But it was not her. The smell was coming from outside and coming in our window. My grandfather said it was probably the male dog and we would bath him in the morning. After about 30 minutes, we heard a howl that was something I'd never heard before, and it scared the dickens out of me. I asked my grandfather, "What was that?" And he said he had not heard that sound since he was a young man. He said he would tell me in the morning, and got up and put a chair under both doors at their doorknobs. Never seen him do that before either. The next day, I got up and me and the dog ran outside. I was going to see the male dog and take him to the creek and give him a bath. My grandfather said the dog won't be there and he probably will never be back. Well, what about the smell? I will tell you later on, but must you think on it? When you go milk and gather eggs, make sure you take a rifle and have it loaded full with one in the chamber, okay? Grandfather, what is going on? I asked. I'll tell you later. When I got to the barn and got the cow to come inside after she refused for a long time, I put the feed in her box, but she refused to eat and just stood there shaking while I milked her. When I let her calf inside with her, even it refused to suckle her. When I went to gather the eggs, there were none. Not even an older egg we left in the nest, so to give the hens an edge on laying more. Then I noticed feathers all over and found the big rooster dead and half eaten. The hens were nowhere around. They usually roost in the barn loft, and I went up to see. Upon stepping off the ladder, the first thing I noticed was the dog smell. Then I noticed 4 piles of hay, one in every corner. I started to get a bad feeling like I was not alone. It was like I was being watched. Then my grandfather hollered and almost scared me out of my skin and told me to come down. When I got down, he was putting a finger to his mouth and for me to not say anything at all. And we turned out of the cow and calf, gathered up the milk and went and got in his truck. As we were driving away, I looked back towards the barn and I could have sworn I saw something moving in the hayloft. I told my grandfather. He said he would tell me later, after he got to his other house on the main road. At the house, I took the milk to my grandmother and started to tell her what was happening. But my grandfather told me to hush, that he would tell it in a few. From the look between both of them, my grandmother knew already. After she got the milk strained and began churning, we sat down at the table. The first thing said was my grandmother asking, "It's back, isn't it?" "Yeah, I believe it is," and JT saw it. "What?" my grandmother asked. Well, he thought he saw someone moving or something moving in the barn loft. I then told about the smell and 4 piles of hay in the loft, 1 in every corner. I also said it felt like I was being watched while I was up there. And then grandfather told me about the Dogman. He said it had been many years past since it had last come into the area and stayed for a while. He said folks had thought it had been run out of the last area. And at first they noticed chickens missing, dogs and cats, then a hog or calf. When old man Frost found his prize bull dead and half eaten, then we knew we had to do something. All the menfolk got together and talked it out, and we decided it was either a demon or a werewolf. Silver was gathered and melted, and bullets were made for every rifle and pistol in the area. Now, no one had seen it yet, but at the local store, an old Cherokee medicine man walked in and told us what it was and what it looked like. It stands 11 feet and at least 500 pounds or more. Looks like a wolf, but is bigger and stands on 2 legs. If it wants to, and no, the full moon does not affect it. He said he was not even sure if the silver affected them, but did say, when you shoot, make sure it is in the head or legs. He said the best was to let it alone, and that it would go away. The men said the women would be at one house, and some of the older menfolk would stay with them as well. The women could shoot as well as the men. When evening came, half of the men went one way, and the others went the other. While driving around an old road, I was in the second truck when the first stopped. When the men started to get out and shouting and pointing, we got out as well. I wish I hadn't even gone after what I saw standing down the road. It was big, and the head was bigger. The claws looked like it had daggers on the end of its fingers. It was growling, and the howling caused a few men to just wet themselves there and then. And then it stopped, and it looked at us and looked like it was smiling at us. Then it took a step towards us, and that was when it seemed like World War II had started. We shot that thing so many times, and yet it still ran off up through the pasture. After that, we were on guard each night, but after a week had gone by, and nothing happened. We all went back to living our lives. Folks thought we had hit it so many times it probably died, or we had just run it out of here. Now, after all of these years, it's back. When we got back to the old place, we brought supplies and heavier rifles and some shotguns. My grandfather also hired some men to replace our doors with heavy oak doors and fixed so bars could be put in to ensure the door was locked while inside. We even built a small stall for the cow and calf so we did not have to go to the barn. From the front porch you could see the barn, and I would sit there eating my supper and watching it, hoping to see something, anything. Then, after doing this for a few days, I saw something dark jump out of the loft at the side of the barn. After it jumped down, I never saw it anymore, but that night the howl came again and again. And even my grandfather, grandmother, who by the way came with us, refusing to stay alone, and I hardly slept that night. Each of us had 2 weapons apiece, close to us for comfort and protection. The next day we got up and I went to milk the cow, only to find both the mother and calf dead. Man, they looked like they had been mauled by 2 bears. Blood and guts everywhere. I ran back and told them. We all 3 went down with our guns and looked around. That was when we found several footprints. And man, they were huge and deep. It looked like a big dog. I told my grandfather I would get the shovel and start digging a hole to bury them, but he told me to never mind. We would leave them, and maybe, when it returns, we can shoot it. That night, about 10 PM, we heard a deep growl and a big fight going on down around the cow. The next day, we found 5 coyotes dead and torn up like the cows. After supper, we were sitting outside and we were eating some cold watermelon. The crickets and frogs were hollering and croaking, and all seemed so peaceful. Then, just like someone had a switch, everything stopped. No sound. Then my grandmother said, "Look out to the road." And when we did, we saw a big black-looking shape sitting there, like a dog, looking at us. Grandfather's female dog started barking, and when the thing growled, she ran inside. And it was then, as we sat there, looking at it, we realised it had gotten closer. Then it was up, running towards the house and us. We all jumped up and ran inside. Grandmother had locked and barred the kitchen door, and Grandfather and me went and did the front door. When we had got the bar in place, something hit the door real hard, and then nothing. We all sat around waiting for something to happen. My grandmother got up and went to the kitchen and started washing dishes. When she screamed and ran back to us, she said the doorknob was shaking, like something was trying to open the door. Then we heard it step onto the porch with a thump, thump, thump. There was a growl, and then like a human was doing it, the doorknob started to turn, but couldn't go far due to the lock. Then, like in the kitchen, it started to try and rip the doorknob out. Granted, seeing and hearing this, I developed a strong urge to use my bathroom, but was afraid to go by myself, and then as quick as it started, it stopped. Nothing else that night. The next day, nothing. My grandfather got my dad and his other son-in-laws and armed. We went to the barn and they didn't find anything, but found it had been living in the loft. They even found the male dog's bones and collar where it ate it. When I went up, I told them, as I was standing there, it felt like I was being watched the other day. One man said it was probably under the hay piles, just watching you, and if you had gone further, nearer to it, well, you know what could have happened. It was like an angel had told my grandfather to come to the barn and tell me to come down from the loft. The only thing left, other than the tracks, was the smell. After my grandfather died, I still roamed the mountains, always having a weapon or two with me, and a good dog. I had a pup from the female dog, and we did not even know she was pregnant. Well, this dog was awesome. I called him General, baddest dog around. He would go with me everywhere I went. One day after school, I decided to go squirrel hunting, as it was cold and the leaves were off the trees. The hunting was good that day, and I stayed longer than I intended to. As I was walking down the road towards home, I realised I had to go past that darn barn. When I started to get close, that feeling like I was being watched came over me again. Then, fearless General tucked his tail between his legs and took off past the barn. Just left me all alone by myself. He ran to the gate and was waiting for me. Before I got to the barn, I stopped and took the .22 caliber shell out of my rifle. I then loaded it back up with a hollow .16 in the tube and one in the chamber. With the safety off and the trigger in my left hand, pointing right, I started past the barn. When I got even with the barn, it was so dark you could not even see down the hallway. As I walked by it, I felt someone or something was there looking at me. It was like there were two voices in my head, one telling me to come inside and look around, and the other telling me do not enter, just go on home. I obeyed and I went towards the home. As I got to the gate and I told General that he was not the bravest dog around, I heard what sounded like someone tapping on the barn. I turned and looked, but I could not see anything. I unlocked the gate, and after we went through, I locked it again. I started to unload on the barn with my rifle. However, my training got the better of me, and I knew never to shoot at what I could not see, so I went home. After I went into the army, years after I got out, my brother and I were talking about that old barn. I had told him what had happened all those years ago, and he said that he too had went by the barn at dark, and General did exactly the same thing. He ran on by. He said he was carrying a 16 gauge shotgun, and before getting to the barn, he stopped and unloaded it and put in a slug. He also took out a buckshot round and had it ready to put in if he had to fire. He said as he got to walking past the barn, and again the hallway was dark, he said he heard something growl at him from inside. He said he'd never heard a sound like that before, and it was a sound like, you just keep walking, because if you come in here, you will never leave alive. The one great thing today is that the darn barn has been torn down and bulldozed over. Regards, Standing Bear. The Banshee. Let's get straight into that. The only noteworthy thing about my high school career was that I was part of the last class. The last class to ever graduate from my town's old high school before the new campus opened in the fall. For all of the years I was there, I hated every moment that I was stuck inside that building. Everything seemed off about the place. The windows always seemed slightly too small for the classrooms inside. The hallways slightly too long and narrow. The cafeteria smelled a little too strongly of pine sol, like they were trying to mask another, more unpleasant odour. The library was like a bunker, with slits for windows and harsh fluorescent lights. Just being in that space seemed to drain the life out of you. The gymnasium floor was creaky and the lights flickered randomly from power surges. Most of my classmates didn't think that the building was any different from any other high school in the United States of America. But every time I stepped across those thresholds inside, the hair on the back of my neck would stand up, and I was instantly put on edge. I craved fresh air and always longed for the day to end so I could go and be released from that horrid place. By the time my senior year rolled around, I was alone in my beliefs. Everyone else went about their normal business, and the sight of it made my skin crawl. How can anyone be so ignorant about the building they spent most of their waking hours in? I chalked my beliefs up to a combination of stress and irrational thought, until one day, after school in senior year, I was working a stage crew for the school's Shakespeare production, and during the intermission I stepped out into the hallway to get some fresh air and a drink. Everything was normal until I stooped over the water fountain. As I gulped down the cold and slightly metallic tasting water, I felt an unbearable sensation that someone was watching me. I whipped my head up and saw something at the end of the hallway looking down towards me. The light it was standing under was broken. Most of its body was obscured in shadow, but what I saw made my blood run cold in fear. It was a woman, approximately 5.5 feet tall, wearing a dress that seemed to be woven out of black holes. The material was so incredibly black that it seemed to be sucking all the light from the hallway into the fabric. Her skin was pale, past the point of beauty, and to the point where it looked sickly. Her face was mostly obscured by that mat of frizzy brown hair, and she was singing softly. I was rooted, frozen to the spot where I stood, my brain running around at 1,000,000 miles per hour. I quickly realised that the words she was saying was not any language that I knew, and probably wasn't a language from this earth at all. Slowly, she tilted her head up to face me, and I nearly passed out when I saw her face. Her pupils were blood red and contained just a small black iris, barely a dot. Her eyes were straight up demonic. Other than that, everything else about her face was normal and pretty. The features of her face were well defined with angular cheekbones, full lips, and she even flashed a perfect set of gorgeous white teeth at me. I ran out the door, into the cool night air, across the parking lot to my car. Most of the drive home was a blur, until I was pulled over for doing 30 over the speed limit. I dubbed the apparition the Banshee, and told everyone I could about it, but nobody would believe me. Be it student, staff, school official. The surveillance camera's footage turned up nothing. Nobody else was in the hallway when it happened. I am the only one who knows of its existence. Nobody believes me. They think I fabricated this whole story just as a cry for attention. Well, I'll show them. Tomorrow night, I'm heading back to that abandoned school with a camera. I'll get photographic proof of the Banshee, if it's the last thing I do. I've always been scared of the woods. Throughout my entire life, I have been absolutely terrified of the woods. I would never set foot in the woods without another person with me. Something about it just gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the silence, or the feeling that you're completely away from civilization. Anything or anyone could be lurking in the bushes, behind the seemingly thousands of trees. Nowhere to go for help, and no people around. Call it an irrational fear if you like, and until recently, that may have been the case. As I said, I never set foot into the woods without someone with me, and that was until recently. I needed an escape, and I thought, what a better place than a place I was absolutely petrified of. It was kind of a kill two birds with one stone kind of thing. Get away from life and conquer my completely baseless fear. So, I decided to go to my local state forest on a decently well-travelled path, mainly just for a little peace of mind. So I started my journey around noon. No big deal, I thought. I could venture in and be out before dark. So, I basically just hiked around for 2 hours, and I gradually felt at peace in the forest, and realised how ridiculous I was for being so scared. After around 4 hours, I decided to go on another trail, off the main one, and then head back to my car, once I'd felt I'd had enough. There was only one thing about that trail that irked me a bit. It was the fact that it was completely unmarked. But it was a very clear path, so I went off. At first, it seemed completely normal. That was until I started noticing that there became less and less trees. But I ventured on nevertheless, and soon I came across a field, seemingly normal. However, that was until I really stopped and examined my surroundings. It was completely silent. No birds, no wind, no scurrying of animals, no crunching of branches. I could barely hear myself think, and this made me very uneasy. However, I didn't just turn around, no. This was the day that I was facing my fears, and damn it, I was going to do it. So I kept walking into the field. It was like it was never ending though. The farther I would walk into it, it would seem like I had barely moved an inch. But there's no way that could be true, because when I would look behind me, I would be farther and farther from the woods. I checked my phone in the off chance I had service, and of course, I didn't. However, I noticed something. My battery was almost completely gone, and it was fully charged when I started. Not to mention I barely touched it during those 5 hours. There was another thing that kept racking my mind. There were no clouds at all. And I'm 100% sure, when I stepped into the field, it was overcast. It felt like hours were passing in just those few minutes of me being in that field. I decided it was time to head back. I ventured far enough. So when I finally got back to the trail, I noticed my phone was completely dead. This gave me whole new levels of anxiety, but I just walked even quicker to get back to my car. The walk back was uneventful. That eased my nerves. Not to mention, as soon as I got back into the woods, all of the normal forest sounds came back. Finally, I made it back to my car and decided to just sit in the parking lot and let my phone charge. However, what I wasn't expecting was the flood of panicked texts and voicemails I had received from my loved ones. They were frantic, asking me if I was okay and where I'd been for so long. I was really confused. I'd only been gone for 7 hours tops. That was until I looked at the dates and time on my phone. Sure enough, it was just the time I expected to be, except that it was 2 weeks later. I don't know what happened or how. I'm not sure if when I went into that field something happened, but I was just the same as when I had gone in. I was just missing 2 weeks of my life. I was of course absolutely freaked out, and now more than ever terrified of the woods. I don't think I'll ever set foot in woods again, with or without someone. My dad's werewolf story. Let's get straight into that. My dad has told me this story countless times since I was only a little boy. My dad had just met my mother and they were happily married to each other. Since going into the military was necessary back in the day, he had to leave my pregnant mother all alone at home with my grandma. I'm going to skip to the part about his stay there to the werewolf part. It was somewhere around midnight. Everyone at camp was sleeping except the guards, him and some random guy. Just as the guards were changing shifts, some of the guard dogs were being attacked by a tall figure, and all that could be heard was the sound of chewing. Dogs being torn apart and loud barking. All of the guards had a chill down their spine and had really big fear instilled in them. They were all too afraid to check what was going on, so they were all hiding, waiting for the end to what was currently going on. After the apparent turn of events, the guards went to check what might have happened, and they were shocked once I had found 2 of the dogs torn apart, eaten, and the whole place being in a mess of organs and torn off dog skin. One of the guards had vomited and started crying, and the other was gazing at the scene while fear tearing him from the inside. He tried keeping his cool and went on to comfort the other guard. The other dogs were visibly scared and were all covered in blood. But one of them seemed to have bit the werewolf and had blood in its mouth. However, no one knew that it didn't bite the dog, but something else, something much bigger. After what had happened, everyone was alerted about the situation and we were told that camp will be moving to another one in approximately 2 to 3 days. Everyone was afraid and a lot of the soldiers were scared for the recent events. At one point, my dad had to be guard, so he was doing his shift. He was obviously very afraid and didn't want to do this, but he still did it because he had to. This time everyone was wary about the 2.5 eaten dog corpses, and everyone thought that one of the dogs, the pit bull, went berserk since it wasn't fed, and it had then gone on to eat the other dogs. While some thought other dumb ideas like the rake eating them, however, that wasn't the case. It was put down and almost everyone thought everything was fine. While he was guarding around, the same thing as last night was going on. But this time he ran there. As he had an AK-47, he wasn't afraid to attack it. By the time he was there, the figure was standing tall where the guard dogs were kept and were eaten away. My dad froze in fear and didn't move, while the furry, tall figure with its snout and mouth covered in blood had turned its head around and stared at him with its glowing, hollow eyes. After that, it seemingly had jumped about 20 feet and then run away. After that, it was never seen again. Everyone at camp was shocked, and they had to move their camp from its current location to one whole 2 towns away. The only reason this hasn't spread out and the media hasn't caught on it was because our country is very poor, so it made sense for there to be no cameras. The story may sound fake, but my dad had explained it in such vivid detail that I just can't help but think it's real. Hope this really was worth sharing. Wow, hope you guys enjoyed that short compilation there. As ever, huge thank you to the authors, particularly Standing Bear on the first story there. Got quite a few stories coming from him. One particular series, guys, that's going to blow your mind. I believe off the top of my head it's Humans and Sasquatch versus Dogman and Skinwalkers. Something crazy in a mountainous location. I'm sure you guys will be able to get your teeth into that as much as I. As ever, please do let me know down below what you thought in the comments. Please do like and share. Your support really does help build the channel and grow this community. I hope you've all had a wonderful week and are now looking forward to relaxing over the weekend. And above all, remember, if you're going hiking or camping in a deep dark forest, keep your wits about you. Keep your eyes up in the trees. And remember, above all, be safe, not sorry.